A millionaire left his Christmas party upon hearing the weak cry of 3 children with nothing to eat. The next day, when he opened his window, he saw something that left him paralyzed. Snow fell gently outside Jack Thornton's mansion, creating a stark contrast with the warmth and glow emanating from its large windows. Inside, the Christmas party was in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and the aroma of expensive dishes filled the air. Jack, impeccable in his custom-tailored suit, moved among the guests with a practiced smile. He stopped here and there, exchanged a few polite words, but his blue eyes remained distant, as if looking for something beyond the mansion's ornate walls. "Excellent party, Jack," exclaimed a heavy-set man, raising his champagne glass. Jack nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thank you, George. Enjoy yourself." He stepped away, walking toward one of the huge windows. His own reflection stared back at him. Perfectly groomed grey hair, a clean-shaven face, not a single wrinkle out of place. But there was something in his eyes, a shadow that all the party's brightness couldn't dispel. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he first thought it was his imagination. Jack frowned, leaning closer to the glass. There it was again, a muffled crying, almost lost beneath the party's chatter. Without a second thought, Jack headed toward the front door. A few guests cast curious looks as he passed, but no one stopped him. The icy air hit him like a slap the moment he opened the door. Jack blinked, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The crying grew louder, coming from somewhere to his right. He circled around the house, the snow crunching beneath his expensive shoes. And then, in the narrow alley between his mansion and the neighboring property, Jack saw them. 3 small figures huddled against a wall, shivering violently. The oldest, a girl with tangled hair, held the other 2 protectively, a wide-eyed boy and a baby softly sobbing. Jack froze. The contrast between the opulence behind him and the misery before him was sickening. The children stared at him, their eyes a mix of fear and desperate hope. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice rough. The oldest girl shook her head, pulling the others closer. Please, sir," she whispered. "We just want a warm place." Jack felt something break inside him. Long-buried memories resurfaced of a time before money, before success, when the world seemed big and frightening. He took a step forward, extending his hand. "Come," he said softly. "Let's go inside." The children hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Jack waited patiently, his hand still outstretched. Finally, the oldest girl stood up, helping the others. They approached cautiously, like wild animals fearing a trap. Jack guided them to the back entrance, aware of the stares they'd attract if they entered through the front. As they walked, he noticed details he hadn't before: worn-out shoes, clothes too thin for winter, tear marks frozen on their cheeks. In the kitchen, far from the curious eyes of the guests, Jack found himself momentarily paralyzed. What now? Feed them, call the authorities, return to the party and pretend none of this happened? The baby's soft crying pulled him from his thoughts. Jack looked at the 3 children shivering in his spotless kitchen and made his decision. "Stay here," he said, his voice gentler than it had ever been. "I'll get something warm for you to eat." When Jack left the kitchen, the party's buzz hit him like a wave. Suddenly, everything seemed surreal. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. He walked as if in a trance back to the main hall. "Jack, where were you?" asked a woman in a shimmering dress. "We were just about to toast." Jack looked at her, then at the cheerful crowd. His gaze traveled to the enormous Christmas tree loaded with expensive presents and glittering ornaments. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his chest. "The party is over." A shocked silence fell over the hall. Jack turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving behind astonished guests and half-full glasses. In the kitchen, the 3 children were still there, watching him with a mix of fear and hope. Jack grabbed a tray and began piling it with party food: turkey, potatoes, pies, everything his hands could reach. As he worked, he could hear the confused murmurs coming from the hall, the sound of people leaving, cars departing, but none of that mattered now. Jack placed the tray on the kitchen table and pulled out chairs for the children. "Eat," he said kindly. "You're safe here." While the children ate hungrily, Jack watched them. The oldest girl, with her sharp, protective gaze. The boyman whose hands trembled slightly as he held his fork, and the baby now smiling as her sister fed her bits of turkey. Jack felt something awaken inside him, something long dormant, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a white blanket. Inside the warm, welcoming kitchen, a new story was beginning to unfold. A story that would forever change the life of Jack Thornton and the three little souls fate had placed in his path. Silence in the mansion was almost palpable, broken only by the gentle clink of cutlery on porcelain. Jack watched the three children eating in the kitchen, his eyes fixed on their every hesitant movement. The oldest girl, Emma, carefully cut the food for Marie, the baby, while Luke devoured his meal as if afraid it might vanish. A noise from the main hall broke the spell. Jack stood up, reluctant to leave the children, but aware he needed to deal with the remaining guests. Entering the hall, he was greeted by looks of shock and curiosity. Margaret Ashworth, a socialite with platinum hair, spoke first. "Jack, darling, what's going on? Who are those creatures in your kitchen?" He felt a surge of irritation at her choice of words. "They're children, Margaret. Children who need help." Robert Fleming, one of Jack's business partners, approached with a frown. "Jack, do you realize what you're doing? This could be dangerous. What if this is some kind of scam?" Jack glared at Robert, feeling a new kind of anger. "A scam. They're starving and freezing, Robert. What kind of scheme do you think this is?" On the other side of the room, Sarah Goldstein, a young lawyer, spoke softly. "I think what you did is admirable, Jack. Not everyone would have the heart to do what you did." Sarah's words seemed to calm the tension in the air a bit, but Jack knew the situation was unsustainable. He took a deep breath and said, "I appreciate you all coming, but the party is over. I'm dealing with a delicate situation here." There were murmurs of protest and confusion, but gradually the guests began to leave. Jack stood at the door, saying mechanical goodbyes, his mind already back with the three children in the kitchen. When the last car drove away, Jack returned to the kitchen. The children had finished eating and now watched him with anxious eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Do you need anything else?" Emma, the oldest, shook her head. "We're fine, sir. Thank you for the food." Jack pulled out a chair and sat down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Can you tell me where you came from? Where are your parents?" The children exchanged glances, a heavy silence falling over the kitchen. Luke shrank further into his chair, while Marie began to whimper softly. "It's all right," Jack hastened to say. "You don't need to talk about it now. The important thing is you're safe here." As he watched the children, a sudden memory invaded Jack's mind. He saw himself as a child, in his childhood living room, opening presents under a lush Christmas tree. His parents smiled. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. The memory made him swallow hard, a lump of guilt forming in his throat. "Come," he said, rising. "I'll show you where you can sleep tonight." Jack guided them to one of the guest bedrooms, large enough to accommodate all three children comfortably. Emma carried Marie, who was already dozing in her arms, while Luke followed closely, his eyes wandering curiously over the luxurious decor. "There are clean clothes here," Jack said, pointing to a dresser. "And the bathroom is right there. If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall." Emma nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and distrust. "Thank you, sir." Jack hesitated at the door, feeling he should say more, do more. But the words escaped him. "Good night," he finally said, closing the door softly behind him. In the mansion's silence, Jack wandered restlessly. He stopped in front of the enormous Christmas tree in the main hall, the expensive gifts beneath it now seeming frivolous and meaningless. Hours passed slowly. Jack tried to sleep, but couldn't. His mind buzzed with questions and worries. What would happen to the children? What should he do? Call the authorities. Try to find their families. Around 3 in the morning, a muffled cry tore him from his thoughts. Jack ran to the children's room, heart pounding. Inside, he found Emma comforting Luke, who had woken from a nightmare. Marie still slept soundly. Emma's eyes met Jack's, a mixture of fear and determination in her gaze. "It's all right," Jack whispered. "You're safe here." He stood at the door, watching as Emma calmed her brother, humming a lullaby. The scene touched him deeply, reminding him of a care and love he hadn't experienced in his own life for a long time. When Luke finally fell asleep again, Jack returned to his room, but not to rest. He sat in his armchair, staring out the window at the softly falling snow. As the sky began to lighten with the first rays of Christmas morning, Jack made a decision. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't just send these children back to the streets. Somehow, for some reason, fate had brought them to him, and he felt for the first time in years that he had a purpose. With this resolve in mind, Jack finally fell asleep, exhausted but determined. The Christmas sunrise would bring not just a new day, but the start of a journey that would forever change the lives of Jack Thornton and the 3 little souls under his care. The Christmas morning sun peeked through the heavy curtains of Jack's bedroom, waking him from a restless sleep. For a moment, he felt disoriented, the previous night's events seeming like a distant dream. Then reality hit him like a punch in the stomach. The children, were they still there? Jack got up abruptly, donned a robe, and headed into the hallway. The mansion was silent, but as he approached the guest bedroom, he heard muffled sounds. He knocked softly on the door. "Hi, you can come in," came Emma's cautious voice. Opening the door, Jack found the 3 children awake. Emma was combing Marie's tangled hair, while Luke looked out the window, his nose pressed against the glass. "Good morning," Jack said, trying to sound casual. "Did you sleep well?" Emma nodded, but before she could answer, Luke shouted, "Sir, sir!" "There's a bunch of people outside." Jack frowned, confused. He approached the window, and what he saw left him paralyzed. A crowd had gathered at the mansion's gates. Men, women, and children, all poorly dressed for the cold, some holding improvised signs. "Please help us," read one. "We need food," pleaded another. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. How was this possible? Where had all these people come from? "They're our friends," Emma's soft voice brought him back to reality. "They saw you helped us last night. The news spread quickly." Jack turned to face her, a mixture of shock and understanding in his eyes. You know all these people?" Emma nodded slowly. "Many of them. We lived on the streets together, helped each other when we could." The reality of the situation hit Jack with full force. He had always known poverty existed in the city, of course, but seeing it like this, literally at his doorstep, was something completely different. A sudden flashback took him back 20 years. Jack, then an ambitious young man, sitting in his first corporate office. "Focus on profit, Jack," his mentor said. "Social responsibility is a luxury we can't afford if we want to survive in this market." Jack shook his head, dispersing the memory. How long had he spent chasing wealth and status, ignoring the suffering around him? "Sir?" Luke's voice brought him back to the present. "What are we going to do?" Jack looked at the 3 children, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension. Then, to his own surprise, he heard himself say, "We're going to help them." In the minutes that followed, Jack moved as if in a dream. He called his security team, instructing them to let people in, but in an organized way. Then he went to the kitchen and began emptying pantries and refrigerators. Emma, Luke, and Marie followed him, watching with wide eyes as he piled food, blankets, skis, and clothes in the main hall. "Can you help me?" Jack asked the children. "You know these people better than I do." The children nodded enthusiastically, appearing more excited than Jack had seen them so far. As they worked, they began to open up, sharing fragments of their stories. "Our parents lost their jobs at the factory 6 months ago," Emma explained as she folded blankets. We tried staying with relatives for a while, but Uncle Mike drank a lot, Luke interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. He got angry and... It's okay, Lukey, Emma calmed him, shooting Jack a meaningful look. We don't have to talk about that now. Jack felt a knot in his throat. How many such stories were out there, stories he never cared to hear? When the doors finally opened, it was as if a dam had burst. People flowed inside, eyes wide at the mansion's opulence, but more focused on the promise of help. Jack found himself distributing food, clothes, and blankets, guided by the children who seemed to know every face, every story. Emma discreetly pointed out a pregnant woman, ensuring she received extra portions. Luke ran around, delivering blankets to the elderly. Even little Marie, in awkward arms, offered smiles and hugs that seemed to warm more than any blanket. Hours passed, and Jack lost track of time. His phone rang incessantly. Christmas commitments, business meetings, invitations to elegant lunches. He ignored them all. As the day wore on, Jack felt increasingly overwhelmed. Not just by the magnitude of need he saw before him, but by the profound sense that something fundamental was changing inside him. When the last visitor left, carrying bags of food and clothes, Jack collapsed into a chair, exhausted but strangely energized. Emma, Luke, and Marie settled onto a nearby sofa, looking equally tired and satisfied. "Thank you," Emma said softly, meeting Jack's eyes. "I've never seen so many people smile on Christmas before." Jack felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Gratitude, purpose. He didn't know what to call it, but he knew he never wanted it to end. "No," he replied, a genuine smile forming on his lips. "I should be thanking you." As the Christmas sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jack looked at the three children who had, in less than 24 hours, turned his world upside down. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he was eager to find out. Christmas, Jack realized, wasn't about expensive gifts or extravagant parties. It was about connection, compassion, and the courage to open not just your door, but your heart. And thanks to three unexpected little visitors, he was finally learning that lesson. The day after Christmas dawned with a strange quiet over Jack's mansion. The children still slept, exhausted after the previous day's events. Jack, however, had been awake for hours, his mind racing. He knew he needed professional help. After a few calls, he managed to contact Sarah Lawson, a social worker recommended by his lawyer. She arrived shortly after noon, her keen eyes assessing the situation as soon as she entered. "Mr. Thornton," she greeted, shaking his hand firmly. "Can you tell me more about these children?" Jack led her to his office and recounted the events of the last 2 days. Sarah listened attentively, making occasional notes. "It's a delicate situation," she said finally. "These children have probably been through much more than we imagine. I'll need to speak with them individually." Over the afternoon, Sarah spent time with each child. Jack watched from afar, noticing how gently she gained their trust. But it was during Emma's conversation that something caught his attention. The oldest girl seemed tense, her eyes constantly drifting toward the windows. Sarah noticed this too. "Emma, you seem worried about something outside," Sarah commented softly. Emma hesitated before answering. "Sometimes, I feel like someone is watching us." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He recalled seeing a strange figure near the gates the previous night, but had dismissed it as paranoia. Later, when the children went to sleep, Sarah shared her observations with Jack. "There's more to this story than simple poverty, Mr. Thornton," she said gravely. "Emma's nightmares, Luke's selective mutism, Marie's anxious attachment, these are signs of deep trauma." Jack's stomach turned. "What do you think happened to them?" Sarah sighed. "It's hard to say for sure, but I suspect abuse, severe neglect, possibly even exploitation." The word hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Jack felt a wave of anger and protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. "For now, provide a safe and stable environment," Sarah replied. But Mr. Thornton, I must warn you, don't get too emotionally involved. These children may need to be reintegrated into the system." "No," Jack interrupted, surprising even himself with the vehemence of his response. "They stay here. At least for now." Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "I understand. But remember, their well-being must come first." In the days that followed, Jack found himself diving deeper into the children's past. He hired private investigators, scoured public records, and even visited the poorest neighborhoods of the city, areas he normally avoided. What he discovered horrified him. A complex network of poverty, institutional neglect, and child exploitation began to unfold. Families evicted due to gentrification, schools closing in poor areas, social programs being cut. One night, reviewing some documents in his office, Jack heard a muffled scream. Rushing to the children's room, he found Emma thrashing in her bed, trapped in a nightmare. "Emma, Emma, wake up," he called softly, hesitant to touch her. "It's okay, you're safe." The girl's eyes snapped open, filled with terror. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him. Then, to Jack's surprise, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. "He was here," she murmured through tears. "The bad man. He found us." Jack's heart clenched. He held Emma, murmuring words of comfort while his mind raced. Who was this bad man? Was he real or a product of Emma's trauma? In the following days, Jack found himself watching the windows more often, always with the unsettling feeling of being watched. One afternoon, while playing in the garden with the children, he glimpsed a figure in the shadows beyond the gate. When he blinked, the figure was gone. Paranoia began to set in, mixed with growing guilt. Jack looked at his mansion, his luxury cars, his expensive clothes, and wondered how many lives could have been improved if he had cared sooner. On a particularly restless night, Jack wandered the mansion's halls. He stopped before a huge mirror, staring at his reflection. Who was he, really? The ruthless business magnate or this newly awakened man, attuned to the injustices of the world? A movement in the reflection caught his attention. For an instant, Jack swore he saw a shadow pass by the window behind him. He turned sharply, heart pounding, but there was nothing there but the dark night. Returning to his room, Jack found Emma sitting on his bed, eyes wide. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I'm afraid to close my eyes," she confessed in a whisper. Jack sat beside her, feeling a wave of protectiveness and affection that surprised him with its intensity. "How you know, Emma?" he began. "When I was a child and I felt scared, my mother used to tell me stories. Would you like to hear one?" Emma nodded timidly. Jack began to tell a tale about a brave girl who faced her fears and saved her village from a dragon. As the story progressed, he saw Emma's eyes grow heavy. When she finally fell asleep, Jack covered her carefully. Looking at the sleeping child, he felt a resolution form in his heart. No matter what happened, he would protect these children. More than that, he would do what he could to change the system that had failed them so terribly. As he returned to his room, Jack did not notice the shadowy figure watching the mansion from across the street, eyes fixed on the lit windows. The battle Jack was about to face was bigger and more dangerous than he could imagine. The following weeks brought an unexpected routine to Jack's mansion. The days, once filled with endless meetings and business dinners, now revolved around the children's needs and schedules. Jack was surprised at how easily he adapted to this new life. One morning, while preparing breakfast, a task he never imagined himself doing, Jack heard a laugh. It was Emma, playing with Marie in the garden. The sound, so pure and genuine, made him pause, a warm feeling spreading in his chest. "They're adjusting well," said Sarah, entering the kitchen. She came by every day, her presence an anchor of normalcy in this new reality. Jack nodded, an involuntary smile appearing on his lips. "They're amazing, aren't they?" Sarah studied him for a moment, noting the subtle change in his posture, the brightness in his eyes when he spoke of the children. "You're adjusting well too, Jack," she commented. Before Jack could respond, Luke ran into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. "Jack! Jack! Look what I found in the garden." Jack crouched down to see what the boy was holding, a small turtle. "Wow, that's cool, Lukey. Where did you find it?" And then, to everyone's surprise, Luke started talking. Not just a few words, but a steady stream of information about where he found the turtle, how it moved, what it ate. Jack and Sarah exchanged astonished looks. It was the first time they'd heard Luke talk so much since he arrived. Encouraged by their attention, Luke continued. "Did you know turtles on the streets are different? They hide better. Once I saw a turtle run away from a big rat. It was scary." Jack's smile faltered. "How you saw a lot of scary things on the streets, didn't you, Luca?" The boy fell silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "A lot. Some days it was hard to find food, and the nights were the worst." Jack felt his heart clench. He knelt, so he was at eye level with Luke. "You're safe now, understand? Nothing will hurt you here." Luke looked at Jack, his eyes full of a mix of hope and fear. "Promise." "I promise," Jack answered, surprised by the intensity of his own emotion. That night, after the children went to sleep, Jack found himself in his office, staring at an old photo. In it, a younger Jack smiled beside his father, both in expensive suits, celebrating the closing of a big deal. "What would you think of me now, Dad?" Jack murmured to the photo. His father had always taught him that success meant profit, that feelings had no place in business. But now, caring for these children, Jack wondered if he'd spent his entire life chasing the wrong kind of success. A muffled cry pulled him from his thoughts. Rushing to the children's room, he found Emma consoling Marie, who had had a nightmare. "It's all right," Jack said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're safe here." Emma looked at him with a mix of gratitude and surprise. "You always come when we cry," she said quietly. "I always will," Jack replied, feeling the truth of those words in every fiber of his being. In the days that followed, Jack began making changes he never imagined. He donated half his wardrobe, cancelled exclusive club memberships, and redirected a significant portion of his income to social causes. Sarah watched these changes with a mix of admiration and concern. "Jack," she said one day, "what you're doing is incredible. But remember, these children might not stay here forever." Jack felt a pang in his chest at her words. The idea of separating from the children was painful in a way he hadn't expected. "I know," he replied, "but as long as they're here, I'll do my best for them." The children, for their part, began showing clear signs of improvement. Emma smiled more often, Luke talked more, and Marie, the youngest, seemed to blossom under constant attention and care. One afternoon, Jack received an unexpected visit. Robert Haas, his old business partner, appeared at the mansion, his face a mask of worry. "Jack, what's happening to you?" Robert asked bluntly. "First you cancel all the meetings, now I hear you're donating fortunes to charity. The board is worried." Jack observed his old friend, realizing how far apart they had grown. "Things have changed, Robert," he said simply. "I've changed." Robert shook his head, incredulous. "You need to return to reality, Jack. This charity project, it can't last forever." Before Jack could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Luke, holding a drawing. "Jack, look what I made," the boy exclaimed proudly. Jack smiled, taking the drawing. It was a colorful image of the mansion, with 5 figures in front, Jack, Sarah, and the 3 children. "It's beautiful, Luke," Jack said, feeling a wave of emotion. He turned to Robert, who watched the scene with a mix of confusion and discomfort. "This, Robert, is my reality now." After Robert left, clearly unsatisfied, Jack hung Luke's drawing in his office. Looking at that simple but powerful representation of his new family, Jack felt a certainty solidify in his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he wouldn't go back to his old life. These children, with their hesitant smiles and resilient hearts, had become more important to him than any deal or fortune. That night, while reading a bedtime story to the children, Jack allowed himself for the first time to imagine a future where this temporary situation became permanent, a future where he was not just a benefactor, but truly their father. Though part of him knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, another part, one growing each day, was eager to face those challenges with Emma, Luke, and Marie by his side. The sun had barely risen when Jack was awakened by the insistent ringing of his phone. "Sleepy," he answered, only to be immediately bombarded by his press officer's agitated voice. "Jack, you need to see this," said the voice without preamble. "They're tearing you apart on social media and in the newspapers." Now fully awake, Jack turned on the TV. The headlines hit him like a punch. "Business tycoon Jack Thornton, genuine philanthropist or opportunist seeking good publicity." The criticism was relentless. Analysts questioned his motives, citing his history of aggressive business practices. Some even suggested the children were part of an elaborate PR stunt. Jack turned off the TV, feeling nauseated. How could they twist something so pure, so genuine? His thoughts were interrupted by a cry from the children's room. Running there, he found Emma in a panic, holding Marie. "Jack, she's burning with fever," Emma cried, tears in her eyes. Marie, usually so lively, lay pale and lethargic in her sister's arms. Jack scooped the girl up, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "We're going to the hospital," he said, already moving toward the door. In the car, with Sarah driving and the children in the back seat, Jack held Marie, whispering words of comfort. He instructed Sarah to head to the best private hospital in the city, but she shook her head. "No, Jack, we need to go to the public hospital. That's where they have records, where doctors know these kids." Jack wanted to protest, but he knew Sarah was right. Arriving at the public hospital, reality hit him like a freight train. The waiting room was crowded, people of all ages waiting for care, many visibly ill or injured. They waited for hours, Jack holding Marie, who alternated between moaning and dozing in his arms. Emma and Luke clung to him, their eyes wide with fear and worry. Finally, they were called Doctor. Ramirez examined Marie carefully and efficiently. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed. "We'll need to admit her." While they prepared Marie for admission, Dr. Ramirez pulled Jack aside. "Mr. Thornton, I recognize these children. They've been here several times over the last year." Jack felt his heart tighten. "Can you tell me more?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Malnutrition, hypothermia, injuries consistent with abuse. It's the reality of many street children we see here." Jack fought a wave of nausea. How does this happen? How do we allow children to live like this?" Dr. Ramirez looked at him for a long moment. "It's a complex question, Mr. Thornton. It involves public policies, social inequality, lack of investment in vulnerable communities. There's no simple answer." While Marie received treatment, Jack wandered the hospital corridors, his mind in turmoil. He saw entire families crammed into small exam rooms, seniors waiting hours for basic care, young mothers with feverish babies in their arms. In a moment of painful clarity, Jack remembered a decision he had made years ago. His company had bought land where a community clinic once operated, demolishing it to build a luxury development. At the time, it had seemed like just a good business move. Now seeing these tired, desperate faces, he wondered how many lives that clinic could have helped. Sarah found Jack sitting on a plastic chair in the hallway, his face buried in his hands. "Jack," she called softly, "are you okay?" He looked up, his eyes red and tired. "How could I have been so blind, Sarah? How could I ignore all this suffering for so long?" Sarah sat beside him, her expression serious. "Jack, there's something you need to know. I've been investigating the children's past and, well, there's a connection to you." Jack's heart froze. "What kind of connection?" Sarah hesitated before continuing. "Their parents worked in one of the factories your company closed 2 years ago. When they lost their jobs, they lost everything. That's how they ended up on the streets." Jack's world seemed to collapse. He remembered that closure, a purely commercial decision to boost profits. How many other families had been affected? How many other children had been thrown onto the streets because of his decisions? "Oh God," he murmured, the realization hitting him full force. "I did this. I'm responsible. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. Jack, you can't change the past, but you can do something about the present and the future. At that moment, Emma appeared in the hallway, worry in her eyes. Jack, Marie is asking for you. Jack stood up, feeling the weight of his past actions, but also a renewed determination. He followed Emma to Marie's room, where the little girl lay, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed. Hey, princess, Jack said softly, sitting beside her. How are you feeling? Marie reached out, grasping Jack's finger. Stay with me, she asked, her voice weak. Always, Jack replied, tears in his eyes. I will always be here for you. As he held Marie's hand, with Emma and Luke huddled close, Jack made a silent promise. He couldn't change the past, okay, but he could and would do everything in his power to create a better future, not just for these 3 children, but for all the others who had suffered due to his ignorance and greed. The road ahead would be hard. There would be more criticism, more challenges. But looking into Emma, Luke, and Marie's trusting faces, Jack knew that, for the first time in years, he was fighting for something bigger than profits and power. He was fighting for love, for justice, and for the chance to redeem not just himself, but to make a real difference in the world. As night fell over the hospital, Jack remained vigilant at Marie's side, gently stroking her hair. In his heart, a resolution formed, a promise of change, of action, of doing better. He couldn't alter the past, but the future. The future was in his hands. The sun had barely risen when Jack entered his makeshift office back at the mansion, his eyes tired after another sleepless night. Marie had been discharged from the hospital, but the revelations of the past days weighed heavily on his conscience. Sarah arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of folders and a determined look. Ready to dive in, she asked, spreading documents across the table. Jack nodded, feeling both apprehension and determination. Where do we start? In the hours that followed, Jack and Sarah pored over statistics, reports, and case studies. The reality of child poverty and homelessness revealed itself in all its complexity and cruelty. It's a vicious cycle, Sarah explained, pointing at a chart. Unemployment leads to poverty, which leads to homelessness, which leads to health and education problems, which in turn make it harder to find work. Jack felt his stomach churn as he recognized familiar patterns. Corporate decisions he had made, factory closures, benefit cuts, outsourcing, had all had ramifications he'd never fully considered. As they worked, they heard laughter from the garden. Through the window, they saw Emma sitting on the grass, drawing, while Luke and Marie played nearby. They look so normal now, Jack commented softly. Sarah smiled. Children are resilient. With the right environment, they can overcome unimaginable traumas. Curious about what Emma was drawing, they decided to take a break and head to the garden. As they approached, Emma looked up, a shy smile on her face. Want to see? She asked, holding out the paper to Jack. What Jack saw left him speechless. It was a complex and moving drawing of life on the streets. Small figures huddled in alleys, searched trash cans for food, slept in cardboard boxes. But amid the darkness, there were points of light, people helping each other, sharing what little they had. Emma, this is incredible, Jack managed, his voice choked. Sarah leaned in for a better look. You have real talent, Emma. This perfectly captures the reality many face. Emma shrugged, but her face shone with the praise. Sometimes drawing helps me not forget, and to remember that even at the worst times, there was kindness. Jack felt something break inside him. Emma's talent not only revealed the harsh reality of the streets, but offered a window into the resilience and humanity that persisted even in the darkest circumstances. Inspired by Emma's art and determined to make a difference, Jack decided it was time to confront his former partners. He scheduled a meeting with the company's board of directors, preparing for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. In the conference room, Jack faced familiar faces, men and women he had worked with for years, building a business empire. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm, "I'm here to discuss a fundamental change in our business practices." Reactions ranged from curiosity to open skepticism. Jack presented the data he and Sarah had collected, showing how the company's decisions had contributed to cycles of poverty in several communities. "But Jack," Robert interrupted, "our responsibility is to the shareholders. We can't sacrifice profit for charity." Jack took a deep breath, remembering Emma and Luke's and Marie's faces. "Our responsibility is to the society we operate in. If we destroy communities for profit, what kind of world are we building?" The discussion that followed was heated. Some directors supported Jack's vision, others resisted fiercely. In the end, it was clear that change would not be easy or quick. Leaving the meeting, Jack felt exhausted but determined. He knew he had planted a seed, but the road ahead would be long and hard. Back at the mansion, Jack found Sarah reviewing more documents. She looked up, her expression grave. "Jack, I found something," she said, handing him a folder. "It's about the factory we closed 2 years ago, the one Emma, Luke, and Marie's parents worked in." Jack opened the folder with trembling hands. The documents revealed a story of neglect and questionable decisions. The factory had been closed not out of real economic necessity, but to boost short-term profits and please shareholders. "My God," Jack murmured, feeling the weight of his past actions. "I did this. I'm responsible for putting those children on the streets." Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Jack, you can't change the past, but you can use this knowledge to make a difference now." In the days that followed, Jack and Sarah worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive plan to tackle the root causes of child poverty. They consulted experts, studied successful programs in other cities and countries, and drafted a strategy that addressed education, healthcare, housing, and job opportunities. Jack began using his influence and contacts to draw attention to the issue. He gave interviews, wrote opinion pieces, and met with local politicians. His new stance generated headlines and heated discussions. "Business tycoon Jack Thornton calls for radical social reforms." One headline read. "Jack Thornton, traitor to capitalism or social visionary?" asked another. Resistance was immediate and intense. Old allies accused him of hypocrisy. Business rivals tried to discredit his intentions. Jack received veiled threats of boycotts and economic retaliation. One night, exhausted after a particularly difficult day of interviews and meetings, Jack found Emma waiting for him in his office. "Are you okay, Jack?" she asked, worry in her eyes. Jack gave a weary smile. "Just a complicated day, dear. Nothing you need to worry about." Emma hesitated, then handed him a piece of paper. It was another drawing. This time, it showed Jack standing, surrounded by shadowy figures shouting at him. But beside him were Emma, Luke, and Marie holding his hands. "We're with you," Emma said simply. Jack felt tears in his eyes. He pulled Emma into a hug, feeling a surge of renewed determination. That night, as the children slept, Jack and Sarah sat on the veranda, contemplating the path ahead. "It won't be easy," Sarah commented. "We're challenging deeply ingrained systems." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know. But looking at these children, at Emma's talent, at their resilience, how can I not try?" Sarah smiled. "So, where do we start?" Jack stood, a new energy in his movements. "We start by doing what's right, one step at a time. And we don't stop until every child has the chance that Emma, Lucius, and Marie are getting now." As the night advanced, Jack and Sarah continued to plan and discuss. The web of poverty was complex and entrenched. But for the first time in his life, Jack felt he was fighting for the right cause. With Emma, Lucius, and Marie as his inspiration, and allies like Sarah by his side, he was determined to make a difference, no matter the cost. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and resistance, but Jack Thornton, once the epitome of ruthless capitalism, was ready to become a champion of social change. The transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. Robert Bennett's office, once a refuge of deals and celebrations for Jack, now felt like a battlefield. Jack took a deep breath before knocking on the familiar door. "Come in." Robert's voice sounded both irritated and curious. Jack entered, carrying a thick folder. Robert, his friend of decades and business partner, regarded him with a cautious expression. "Jack, what a surprise. Finally decided to come back to your senses." Jack shook his head, placing the folder on the desk. "No, Robert. I'm here to talk about this." As Robert flipped through the documents, his expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to defensive anger. "This is madness, Jack. You want to dig up every decision we've made in the last 20 years. Everything we did was legal." "Legal doesn't mean ethical, Robert," Jack countered firmly. "Look at the numbers. How many lives did we ruin in the name of profit?" The argument that followed was heated. Robert accused Jack of hypocrisy, reminding him of decisions they had made together. Jack, in turn, confronted his old friend with evidence of practices that went beyond the ethical limits of business. "Have you lost your mind, Jack?" Robert finally exploded. "You want to throw away everything we built?" Jack looked out the window, at the city they had helped shape. "No, Robert. I want to fix what we broke." Leaving a stunned Robert behind, Jack walked out of the office with a heavy heart but renewed determination. Meanwhile, Sarah had delved into her own investigation. She found Jack at the mansion, her face a mixture of frustration and outrage. "Jack, it's worse than we thought," she said, spreading documents over the table. "The local social programs. It's a disaster." The evidence was clear: misused funds, projects abandoned halfway, systematic neglect of the most vulnerable communities. "How did we let this happen right under our noses?" Jack murmured, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Before Sarah could reply, they heard a scream from the garden. Running outside, they found Luke curled up under a tree, trembling. Jack approached cautiously. "Luke, is everything okay, buddy?" The boy looked up, tears in his eyes. I saw a man. He looked like Uncle Mike." Jack's heart tightened. It was the first time Luke mentioned the abusive uncle's name. Sitting next to the boy, Jack spoke softly. "Want to tell me about him?" To everyone's surprise, Luke began to speak. Words poured out like a broken dam, revealing a past of abuse, neglect, and constant fear. Jack listened, heartbroken but grateful for the trust Luke was placing in him. When Luke finished, exhausted and sobbing, Jack hugged him tightly. "You're so brave, Luke, and I promise no one will ever hurt you like that again." That night, after the children were asleep, Jack found himself alone in his office, facing his reflection in the mirror. Who was he really? The ruthless businessman he had been for so many years, or this new man determined to make a difference? His reflections were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Emma. "Jack," she called timidly, "can I talk to you?" He nodded, noticing the worry in her eyes. Emma approached, hesitant. "Is it true they might separate us?" she asked. The question hit Jack like a punch. "Who said that, Emma?" "I heard Sarah on the phone," she replied, voice trembling. "Please, don't let that happen. I can't lose Luke and Marie. They're all I have." Jack knelt down to her level. "Listen, I promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you together. You're a family, and families should stay together." The words left his mouth before he could think, but Jack realized he meant them deeply. These children had become his family too. The next morning, Jack made a decision that he knew would change everything. He called a press conference. In front of a packed room of journalists and cameras, Jack Thornton, once the ruthless business magnate, did something no one expected. He confessed. "For years," he began, voice steady despite his nerves, "I led a company that prioritized profit over people. We made decisions that, while legal, were deeply unethical. We closed factories without considering the impact on communities. We cut benefits to increase profit margins. We ignored the long-term effects of our actions on society." The room was silent, dozens of pens scribbling furiously. "Today, I'm here to say I'm deeply sorry, and more than that, I'm committed to fixing these mistakes. From now on, every decision we make will be guided not just by profitability, but by the positive social impact we can create. The questions came like an avalanche. Journalists demanded details, questioned his sincerity, speculated about his motivations. "Mr. Thornton, does this have something to do with the children you supposedly took in?" a reporter shouted. Jack hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly, "Those children opened my eyes to a reality I chose to ignore for too long. They're not the reason for my change, but a constant reminder of why it's needed." In the days that followed, the media went into a frenzy. Headlines screamed, "Jack Thornton, saint or repentant sinner?" "Shocking confession shakes the corporate world." "The true motives behind Thornton's conversion." The pressure was immense. Jack received constant calls from furious shareholders. Old allies accused him of betrayal, and even some social programs he tried to help regarded his offers with suspicion. Amid the chaos, Jack found an unexpected moment of peace. Sitting in the garden with Emma, Luke, and Marie, watching them play and laugh, he felt a surety forming in his heart. Sarah joined him, offering a cup of coffee. "You opened Pandora's box, Jack," she commented. "There's no going back now." Jack nodded, his eyes on the children. "I know, and I don't want to go back. For the first time in my life, Sarah, I feel like I'm on the right path. It won't be easy, but..." He paused, watching Emma help Marie onto a swing, Luke laughing beside them. "But it's worth it, for them, and for all the other children who deserve a chance." Sarah smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder in silent support. The road ahead would be hard, full of obstacles and criticism, but looking at those 3 children who had changed his life so deeply, Jack knew he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. Jack Thornton's journey of redemption was only beginning, but with each step, each decision, he was determined to build a legacy he could truly be proud of. The sun had barely risen when Jack entered his office, determination shining in his tired eyes. Spreadsheets, reports, and projects covered every inch of his desk. In the past few days, he had thrown himself fully into creating an ambitious program to help homeless children. Sarah entered, carrying more papers and a worried expression. "Jack, we need to talk." He looked up, noting the tension in her voice. "What is it?" Sarah sighed, taking a seat. "My superiors. They're not happy with my involvement in this project. They say I'm crossing ethical lines, getting too involved." Jack frowned. "But your knowledge is crucial to making this work." "I know," she replied, a sad smile on her lips. "That's why I'm considering resigning." The statement took Jack by surprise. "Sarah, I can't ask you to do that." She shook her head. "You're not asking. It's my choice. These children, this project, it's bigger than any job." Before Jack could respond, they heard laughter coming from the garden. Through the window, they saw Emma, Luke, and Marie playing, unaware of the complexities of the adult world. "Look at them," Jack murmured, emotion in his voice. "A few weeks ago, they barely dared to dream about tomorrow. Now..." Sarah nodded, understanding. "That's why we have to keep going, no matter the cost." The moment was interrupted by the phone, ringing insistently. It was Robert, his tone icy when Jack answered. "Emergency board meeting now." Jack arrived at the office to find a tense conference room. Familiar faces glared at him with a mix of anger and disappointment. Robert stood up, his voice sharp. "Jack, this has to stop. Your philanthropic activities are seriously affecting our business. Shareholders are nervous, partners are pulling out. What do you want me to do?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "It's simple," another director intervened. "Drop this crazy charity project and refocus on the business, or we'll have to vote you out of the presidency." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and merciless. Jack felt the weight of years of ambition, success, and luxury pressing down on him. Images of his old life, private jets, yachts, extravagant parties, contrasted sharply with the children's laughter in his garden. "Give me 24 hours, he finally said, his voice hoarse. Leaving the meeting, Jack found himself wandering the city streets, his thoughts in turmoil. He passed through wealthy neighborhoods, where he had once been a king, and through impoverished areas he had previously ignored. The disparity hit him like never before. Returning to the mansion, he found Emma waiting. "Jack, are you okay?" she asked, her intuition picking up his anguish. He knelt to face her. "Emma, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" The girl thought for a moment, then answered simply, "A family, and to help other children like us." Emma's words echoed in his mind as night fell. Jack barely slept, weighing his options. His past against this new future he was only beginning to glimpse. The next morning, as he prepared to face the board, Jack received an unexpected call. A journalist wanted a comment on a story about to be published. "Mr. Thornton, we have information that your company was involved in abusive labor practices in overseas factories. Any comment?" Jack's heart raced. He knew exactly what this referred to, decisions made years ago which he had conveniently ignored at the time. Now, it seemed his past was about to catch up to him. Arriving at the office, Jack found chaos. The story had leaked, and reporters swarmed the building. The board was in panic, accusations flying everywhere. Then something unexpected happened. A group of people managed to get past security and entered the meeting room. Jack recognized some faces, ex-employees of the factories that had been closed. "We came to defend Jack Thornton," a woman announced, her voice firm. "He made mistakes, yes, but he's the only one trying to fix them." In the following minutes, former employees shared stories of how Jack's new program had impacted their lives and communities. They spoke of jobs regained, children returning to school, renewed hope. The media, hungry for a twist, devoured every word. Within hours, the narrative changed. From corporate villainy, Jack was now portrayed as a man seeking redemption, facing his past to build a better future. The board, caught off guard by this turn of events, retreated temporarily. But Jack knew it was only a temporary truce. That night, back at the mansion, Jack gathered Sarah and the children. "I have an important decision to share with you," he began, his heart pounding. "I'm leaving my position at the company." There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Emma spoke. "Why?" Jack smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "Because there's more important work to be done. And I want to dedicate all my time and resources to it. To you, and to all the other children who need help." Sarah looked at him with a mix of admiration and worry. "Jack, are you sure? You're giving up everything?" He shook his head, looking at the 3 children who had changed his life. "No, Sarah, I'm gaining everything." That night, as the city slept, Jack Thornton, once the epitome of corporate success, began planning the next chapter of his life. A chapter not defined by profits or power, but by compassion, redemption, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. The road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles and uncertainties. But looking at Emma, Luki, and Marie, Jack knew he had found something more valuable than any fortune, a purpose. And for that purpose, he was willing to risk everything. The makeshift office in Jack's mansion was filled with blueprints, diagrams, and documents. Jack and Sarah spent days hunched over every detail of the ambitious support center they planned to create. "If we get approval," Sarah explained, pointing to a floor plan, "we can accommodate up to 100 children and their families. In addition to temporary housing, we'll offer education, medical care, and job training." Jack nodded, his eyes shining with determination. It's exactly what this city needs. A place that not only shelters but empowers. As they discussed the final details, they heard laughter in the garden. Emma, Luke, and Marie were playing, oblivious to the complexities of the grown-up world around them. Jack's heart tightened, knowing what was about to come. The next morning, with heavy hearts, Jack and Sarah explained to the children that they'd have to stay temporarily in a shelter while the project was approved. "But why?" Luke asked, eyes large with fear. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, my dear," Sarah answered gently. "It's just a legal formality. Jack is working hard to make sure you can stay together permanently." Emma, always the protector, hugged her younger siblings. How long? Jack knelt to meet their eyes. I'll do my best to make it as brief as possible. I promise I'll visit every day. As the children were taken away, Jack felt as if a part of him were being torn out. The mansion, once filled with life and laughter, now felt strangely empty. That night, unable to sleep, Jack found himself remembering the Christmas Eve he first met the children, the memories mixed with fragments of their shared stories over the months. Emma, at 6 years old, holding her siblings' hands tightly as they wandered the freezing streets. Her fierce determination to protect them, even when her own stomach growled with hunger. Luke, only 4, shivering with cold, eyes wide with fear at the sound of distant sirens, the trauma of abuse still fresh in his young mind. And little Marie, 2 years old, crying silently, confused and scared, not understanding why they weren't home, why there was no food, why it was so cold. Jack remembered the moment he first saw them, huddled in that alley. How could he have lived so long ignoring the suffering right under his nose? The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Jack faced an endless series of meetings, hearings, and negotiations. Each bureaucratic hurdle cleared revealed another. "Mr. Thornton," a city official said condescendingly, "I understand your good intentions, but a project of this scale, well, there are protocols to follow." Jack felt his patience wearing thin. Protocols? What about the children sleeping on the streets right now? They can't wait for your bureaucracy. Leaving City Hall, Jack was confronted by a group of local residents protesting the project. "We don't want more homeless people in our neighborhood," shouted one man. "It'll lower our property values," Jack tried to argue, to explain how the project would benefit everyone, but his words fell on deaf ears. Returning to the mansion, exhausted and discouraged, Jack found Sarah immersed in research. "Jack," she called, her voice tense, "I found something intriguing." She showed him a series of old documents. "Remember the factory you closed a few years ago? The one where the children's parents worked?" Jack nodded, feeling a knot in his stomach. "It seems that wasn't the first time your business decisions directly affected these families," Sarah continued. "There's a deeper connection here. Your father's company also impacted their grandparents decades ago." Jack felt the weight of this revelation. It was as if fate had intertwined their lives in a way he could never have imagined. "It's like I have a generational debt to them," he murmured. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Or maybe it's a chance to break a cycle." Though shocking, the revelation ignited a new determination in Jack. He realized he wasn't just fighting for Emma, Luke, and Marie, but for generations of families affected by callous corporate decisions. With renewed vigor, Jack began mobilizing his extensive network. He called on old business partners, cashed in long-forgotten favors, and used every ounce of his influence. "Robert," he said over the phone to his old partner, "I know we have our differences, but I need your support on this. Think of the lives we can change." Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. An influential politician, moved by Jack's personal story, decided to back the project. A local entrepreneur offered additional land. A construction company volunteered to work at reduced costs. Jack discovered a new side of his leadership, no longer the ruthless businessman, but a compassionate visionary, capable of inspiring others to unite for a greater cause. Meanwhile, his daily visits to the shelter where Emma, Luke, and Marie stayed became his emotional anchor. Seeing the children's progress, hearing their stories and dreams, rekindled his determination in the darkest moments. "Jack," Emma said during one of these visits, her eyes shining with hope, "when can we come home?" The word home hit Jack deeply. For these children, his mansion had become more than a temporary shelter. It was a home. "Soon, dear," he promised, determined to make it true. As the project gained momentum, Jack realized he was in the midst of not only an external transformation, but a deeply personal one. Each obstacle overcome, each alliance formed, each child's smile shaped him into a different man than he had once been. The storm of challenges had not yet passed, but Jack Thornton was ready to face it, with Sarah by his side, the children's love in his heart, and a clear vision of the future he wanted to create. He knew no obstacle would be too great. The support center was no longer just a project. It was the start of a silent revolution, a chance to repair past wrongs and build a more just and compassionate future. And Jack was determined to see this vision become reality, no matter the cost. The sun had barely risen when Jack entered his office, determined to finalize the last details of the support center project. There was little left before final approval, and he could almost taste victory. Sarah arrived soon after, carrying another stack of documents. "Good morning, Jack. Ready for the final stretch?" she asked with an optimistic smile. Jack nodded, but before he could reply, his phone rang. It was his lawyer, sounding tense. "Jack, we have a problem. An audit revealed some irregularities in old company transactions. We need to review everything immediately." Jack's heart sped up. What irregularities could be so serious as to worry his seasoned lawyer? In the hours that followed, Jack and a team of auditors dived into years of financial records. As they dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Late in the afternoon, the devastating truth came to light. Jack was reviewing documents from a subsidiary when something caught his attention. Familiar names, dates that matched factory closures, suspicious fund transfers. "This can't be," he murmured, his face pale. Sarah, noticing his agitation, approached. "Jack? What is it?" With trembling hands, Jack showed her the documents. "Sarah, look at this. These transfers, these mass layoffs. They weren't just business decisions. It was a deliberate exploitation scheme." As they unraveled the scheme, the magnitude of the situation became clear. Jack's fortune, the empire he had built, had been erected on the backs of exploited workers, destroyed communities, ruined lives. Emma, Luke, and Marie's parents. Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. They weren't just victims of a factory closure. They were deliberate targets of this scheme. The revelation hit Jack like a freight train. His entire life, all his achievements, suddenly seemed stained, corrupted. How could he continue his charity work, knowing the money came from such a dirty source? Jack stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and red. It was a cruel contrast to the darkness now engulfing his heart. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked in her voice full of concern. Jack remained silent for a long moment, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. Revealing the truth would mean not only the end of his charity project, but possibly prison, the complete ruin of everything he had built. But keeping the secret, how could he live with himself knowing the truth? "I need some air," he finally said, leaving the office. Jack wandered through the mansion's gardens, his refuge in recent months. Reaching the playground he had built for the children, he sat on a swing, feeling more lost than ever. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, he saw Emma, Luke, and Marie walking toward him. They had come for a scheduled visit, but Jack had completely forgotten. "Jack!" Luke shouted, running to hug him. "We missed you." Emma, always perceptive, noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked softly. Looking at the innocent, trusting faces of the children, Jack felt his heart break. How could he tell them the truth? How could he say he was largely responsible for their suffering? Marie, the youngest, climbed onto Jack's lap, hugging him with her small arms. "Don't be sad, Jack," she said in her childish voice. "We love you." Those simple words, spoken with such sincerity, broke something inside Jack. Tears began to roll down his face as he embraced the children. I did something very bad," he began, voice trembling. "Something that hurt many people, including you and your families." The children listened in silence as Jack, in simple words, tried to explain what he had discovered. He expected anger, disappointment, maybe even hatred in their eyes, but what he saw surprised him. Emma, the oldest, took his hand. "Jackie, you're trying to fix things now, aren't you? That's what matters." Luke nodded vigorously. "That's right. You saved us. You're helping other kids too." The unexpected compassion and forgiveness from the children touched Jack deeply. Despite everything they had suffered, these children still saw the good, still believed in redemption. In that moment, Jack made his decision. He couldn't continue living a lie. He couldn't build a better future on a foundation of deceit. Returning to the office with the children, Jack found Sarah still working. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, despite the fear he felt, "I'm going to reveal everything. I'm going to make a public confession." Sarah looked at him, shocked. "Jack, are you sure? This could destroy everything we're trying to build." Jack nodded, feeling a strange peace despite the storm he knew was coming. "It's the only way. We can't help these children. We can't change the world if we're not willing to face the truth, no matter how painful." In the days that followed, Jack worked tirelessly to prepare his confession. He gathered all the evidence, prepared for legal consequences, and most importantly, tried to ensure that the support center could continue even without him. On the eve of his press conference, Jack spent the evening with Emma, Luke, and Marie. They played, laughed, and for a few precious hours, Jack allowed himself to forget what lay ahead. When it was time to put them to bed, Emma hugged him tight. "We're proud of you, Jack," she whispered, "no matter what happens." The next morning, facing a room packed with journalists, cameras, and the weight of his own actions, Jack Thornton stepped forward, ready to face the truth and its consequences. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even impossible. But looking at Sarah and the children at the back of the room, he found the courage to begin. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here today to make a confession." The media roar was deafening. In the days following Jack Thornton's public confession, the world seemed turned upside down. Blazing headlines dominated every paper and news channel. "Magnate confesses, empire built on exploitation." Jack Thornton, from hero to villain, corporate scandal rocks city, thousands of lives affected. Jack watched the chaos from his office-turned-bunker in the mansion. Sarah entered, carrying more stacks of newspapers. "The legal charges are starting to pile up," she said, her voice tense. "State and federal prosecutors are demanding investigations." Jack nodded wearily. He knew this was just the beginning. "And the support center?" Sarah sighed. "It's complicated. Many donors are pulling back, worried about being associated with the scandal." Before Jack could respond, they heard a commotion at the mansion's entrance. A security guard rushed in. "Mr. Thornton, there's a man insisting on seeing you. He says it's urgent." Jack and Sarah exchanged apprehensive looks and went to the entrance. There they found a middle-aged man, gray-haired and tired-eyed, but determined. "Jack Thornton," the man asked, voice trembling with emotion. "My name is David Hawkins. I'm Emma, Luke, and Marie's father." The world seemed to stop. Jack felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Please, come in," he managed to say, guiding David to the living room. Once seated, a heavy silence fell. It was David who broke it. "I saw your confession on TV," he began, voice a mixture of anger and sadness. "I worked at the Millbrook factory. When it closed, we lost everything." Jack listened, his heart tightening with every word. David continued, describing the months of struggle after the factory's closure, how he desperately searched for another job, how their money ran out, how they eventually lost their home. We lived on the streets for months," David said, tears rolling freely down his cheeks. "I tried to keep the kids safe, but it was so hard. One day I went out to look for food, and when I came back, they were gone." Jack closed his eyes, remembering the Christmas Eve when he found the children. Now the puzzle pieces fit painfully together. "Mr. Hawkins," Jack began, voice choked. There are no words to express how sorry I am. What I did..." David raised his hand, cutting him off. "I'm not here for your apologies, Mr. Thornton. I'm here for my children. Where are they?" At that moment, as if summoned by fate, Emma, Luke, and Marie's voices echoed down the hall. They had returned from an outing with a social worker. Time seemed to slow as the children entered the room. Emma was the first to see David, her eyes widening in recognition and fear. "Daddy," Luke whispered, voice trembling. Marie, too young to remember clearly, hid behind Emma. David stood, tears in his eyes. "My babies." What followed was a scene of conflicting emotions. David tried to embrace the children, but Emma backed away, pulling the others with her. "You left us," she accused, voice heavy with hurt. "You promised you'd come back and you didn't." David fell to his knees. "I looked for you every single day. I never meant to abandon you." Jack watched, feeling like an intruder in this family moment, yet unable to leave. He could see the conflict in the children's eyes, the desire to believe their father fighting against the fear and distrust years on the streets had instilled in them. Sarah finally broke the impasse. "Why don't we all sit down and talk calmly?" she suggested, her voice gentle but firm. In the hours that followed, a complex and painful story emerged. David spoke of his struggle with alcoholism after losing his job, how it affected his judgment and ability to care for his children. Emma, reluctantly, shared the fears and traumas they had endured on the streets. Jack listened, each word a knife in his heart. These weren't statistics in a corporate report. This was a real family, real lives torn apart by his decisions. When the story ended, a heavy silence fell. It was broken by the sound of approaching sirens. "Mr. Thornton," a police officer said, entering the room, "we have a warrant for your arrest related to the corporate fraud and labor exploitation charges." The chaos that followed felt surreal. As Jack was handcuffed, David shouted, demanding custody of his children. The children cried, clinging to Sarah, while reporters outside clamored for statements. In the midst of the confusion, Jack managed a moment with Sarah and the children. "Listen," he said urgently. "No matter what happens to me, the support center must go on. These children, all of them, need help." Emma, tears in her eyes, hugged Jack. "We won't give up," she promised. "Not on you, not on the center." As he was led away, Jack saw David talking intensely with Sarah and a social worker. The future of the children, the support center, and everyone involved seemed uncertain and tumultuous. But even facing an uncertain future, possibly behind bars, Jack felt a strange peace. For the first time in his life, he was facing the truth of his actions and taking responsibility for them. The road ahead would be difficult, but looking back at Sarah, David, and the children, Jack knew that whatever happened, the fight to do the right thing was worth it. Snow fell softly outside the Thornton Support Center, its flakes dancing under the colorful lights decorating the building. Inside, cheerful voices and children's laughter filled the air. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Jack Thornton's public confession that changed everything. Jack stood in the center of the main hall, watching the scene around him with a mix of gratitude and amazement. The place was unrecognizable compared to the abandoned building it had been a year ago. Now it was full of life, color, and above all, hope. Sarah approached, a warm smile on her face. "Hard to believe we made it, isn't it?" Jack nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream." The journey had not been easy. After his arrest, Jack faced months of legal battles. He pleaded guilty to several charges, taking full responsibility for his past actions. But in a surprising turn, the judge considered his efforts at reparation and his full cooperation with the authorities. The final sentence, 5 years of probation and the obligation to turn what remained of his fortune into a foundation dedicated to helping working families and homeless children. For Jack, it wasn't a punishment, but an opportunity for redemption. Across the hall, Jack spotted David handing out presents to the children. David's transformation was almost as dramatic as Jack's. Sober for almost a year, he now worked as a counselor at the center, using his own experience to help other families through hard times. "Dad, Jack!" Luke's excited voice cut through the air. The boy, now 5, ran toward them, followed closely by Emma, 7, and Marie, 3. Jack knelt, opening his arms to hug the children. The process of gaining shared custody with David had been long and emotionally draining, but seeing the smile on the children's faces made it all worth it. "Look what we made," Emma exclaimed, proudly showing a drawing. It depicted a large family smiling in front of the support center. Jack recognized himself, David, Sarah, and the children, but there were many other faces too, other families who had become part of their lives. "It's beautiful, Emma," Jack said, tears forming in his eyes. "You captured our family perfectly." The word family now had a completely new meaning for Jack. It was no longer defined by blood ties or legal documents, but by love, care, and a shared commitment to making a difference. Sarah called everyone's attention, announcing it was time for the special Christmas presentation. The lights dimmed, and a group of children, including Emma and Lucy, took the makeshift stage. As the children sang, their sweet voices filling the air with Christmas melodies, Jack couldn't help reflecting on his journey. A year ago, he was a man consumed by greed, blind to the suffering his actions caused. Now he stood here, part of something bigger than himself, dedicating his life to repairing the damage he had done and creating a better future for those who needed it most. The performance ended with enthusiastic applause. Jack noticed David wiping tears from his eyes, his gaze fixed on his children on the stage. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. Both had made mistakes. Both were on a journey of redemption, and together they were creating something beautiful from the ashes of their past failures. After the presentation, Jack stepped onto the stage to make a brief speech. Looking at the sea of faces, some familiar, others new, all part of this growing community, he felt a wave of emotion. "A year ago," he began, voice trembling slightly, "I was in a very different place. I thought success meant money, power, status. But three little angels," he smiled at Emma, Luke, and Marie, "showed me the true meaning of wealth." Jack paused, swallowing the lump in his throat before continuing. "This center, this community we've built together, is the real wealth. Every smile, every transformed life, every reunited family, this is the legacy I want to leave." Looking at Sarah, now running the program with skill and passion, at David, who had found new purpose helping others, and at all the families present, Jack felt a surge of gratitude. "We're just getting started," he concluded. "There's so much more work to do, so many more lives to touch. But together, as a family, a community, we can create a future where no child has to sleep on the streets, where no family has to choose between food and shelter. This is the true spirit of Christmas: love, compassion, and the belief that we can make a difference." As Jack stepped off the stage, he was immediately wrapped in a collective hug by Emma, Luke, and Marie. David joined them, and soon Sarah too. It was a hug that symbolized everything they had achieved and all that was still to come. The celebration continued into the night. Families shared meals, children played, and everywhere there was a tangible feeling of hope and possibility. Later, as the night drew to a close, Jack found himself again in the center of the hall. He watched Emma help a younger child build a paper snowman, Luke excitedly explaining his new science project to a group of attentive adults, and Marie asleep in David's arms. Sarah approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Jack," she said softly. Jack smiled, his heart full. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." As the last guests departed and the staff began to tidy up, Jack stepped onto the center's veranda. Snow still fell gently, covering the city with a pure white mantle. It was as if the universe itself was offering a new beginning, a blank page for a new story. Jack breathed the cold night air, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. His journey of redemption was far from over, but each day brought new opportunities to make a difference, to be better, to build the kind of world he wanted for Emma, Luke, Marie, and all the other children. With a final look at the starry sky, Jack went back inside to his family, to his new purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. And Jack Thornton was ready to embrace them all, with love, courage, and the certainty that together they could create a better future for everyone.